Today, we're diving into something super fascinating called the Lucifer Effect. It all stems from this infamous psychology study known as the Stanford Prison Experiment. This thing shook up the worlds of psychology, sociology, and even the legal system in a big way. It even got adapted into a film later on, like the Stanford Prison Experiment, which hit screens back in 2015. The whole setup took place in 1971 down in a basement lab at Stanford University. The main idea was to prove that if you take everyday folks and drop them into unusual situations, giving them special authority or assigning them a specific role, their mindset and actions would shift to match that setup, no matter what their natural personality was like. Put simply, it shows that how people think and behave isn't just about their inner traits or morals. It's heavily influenced by the circumstances around them. The mastermind behind it was the renowned American psychologist Philip Zimbardo, who sadly passed away in 2024 at the age of 91. When he kicked this off, he was only 38 and serving as a professor in Stanford's psychology department. Zimbardo was convinced that outside factors drive human behavior and thoughts, so he designed this study to back up his theory in the most unbiased and lifelike way possible. To start, he transformed the school's basement lab into a fake prison that mirrored a real one down to the details. At the time, pulling that off was totally above board, but you couldn't get away with it today. Next, they ran an ad in the papers looking for volunteers for a sealed-off psych study. It was set to run for roughly 2 weeks, with meals and a place to stay provided, plus $15 a day. That $15 from 1971 works out to around $120 in today's money. Word is, more than 70 people jumped at the chance. Out of that bunch, they picked 24. Among them, 12 took on prisoner roles, while the other 12 became guards. Who got which part was decided totally at random. Early on, most participants actually preferred being prisoners since, for a lot of us, that's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing to try. But trust me, that opinion probably flipped pretty quick. They put a ton of care into picking those 24. Everyone went through psych evaluations and social background checks. In the end, they went with completely ordinary guys. None of them had mental health red flags or aggressive leanings. They were about as normal as it gets, chill, even-keeled, with zero messy personal histories. To amp up the realism, every prisoner volunteer got a heads up that real cops would show up at their door at a scheduled time to arrest them. During the bust, they'd get patted down and slapped with actual handcuffs. Once at the station, all their stuff got seized. They'd take fingerprints too, then haul them off to the basement setup. Upon arrival at the mock jail, they'd strip down for a full-body check. Chains went on everyone's ankles. In the end, they suited up in prison gear complete with ID numbers on the shirts. For the entire run, nobody used real names. It was all about those numbers. The routine matched real arrests to a T. On the guard side, each one received a cop uniform, a nightstick, and a pair of shades. Those shades might look like no big deal, but they're key. In a prison vibe, they stand for power and cut off eye contact, leaving prisoners feeling on edge and rattled. On top of that, guards hiding behind shades tend to get rougher since dodging direct stares makes them less hesitant to act out. It's kind of like how folks blast hate online. They're bolder, because they don't have to face you. This study came with its own set of guidelines. For instance, prisoners couldn't lay a hand on guards and had to follow every command. Prisoners only scored 30 minutes of free time daily, spending the rest locked in cells. No chit-chat between prisoners and guards. If a prisoner stepped out of line, say by ignoring an order, the guard picked the consequence. Plus, no physical rough stuff was permitted at all. Cameras watched everything around the clock. The original plan called for 2 full weeks, so they'd all bunk there that long. If anybody broke the rules during those weeks, couldn't pull off their role, or bailed early, the whole thing would shut down and nobody cashed in. Basically, the group had to nail their parts, tough it out to the finish, and stay rule-abiding to earn the pay. And just like that, the experiment launched. Day 1, the prisoner crew looked pumped up, all smiles and chatter. Meanwhile, the guards were clueless on how to proceed. Being strangers, they felt awkward and held back from bossing the prisoners around. But as the hours ticked by, the guards slipped into their parts, realizing that if they didn't crack down and handle things right, letting the prisoners goof off and make noise, they might kiss that paycheck goodbye per the setup. So they toughened up, barking orders like freeze, stay put, zip it. And once the guards locked in, the prisoners began adapting right along with them. They came to understand that these guards meant business, so they started feeling on edge too. Both sides spent that first day in this thick tension, but real trouble kicked off on day 2. To keep the guards out of his cell, one prisoner shoved his bed against the door as a barricade. Seeing that, the nearby prisoners jumped in and started causing a ruckus. After huddling up, the guards chose to barge into the cell by force, and they even tried shifting the beds outside to stop it from happening again. Right in the middle of all that, a clash broke out between the two groups. Soon, several guards teamed up to overpower that prisoner. The one being restrained yelled out loud, "Are you guys out of your minds? Isn't this experiment totally insane?" Not long after, just 36 hours from the start, one prisoner named Douglas Corpy suddenly broke down. He was still a college student at the time. He began screaming and sobbing uncontrollably, begging the experiment team to let him go. He said he couldn't take it anymore and just wanted out. Once they spotted this through the surveillance cameras, Professor Zimbardo stepped into the cell to get ready to release Douglas. But in the end, even though he was set to leave, Douglas ended up staying a bit longer before being let go. Analyses suggest that at that moment, he reconsidered, because bailing might mean no one got paid. Deep down, he was tied up psychologically by the group dynamic. Even though he desperately wanted to quit, he chose to hang in briefly out of concern for how the others would see him. Ultimately, Dr. Zimbardo decided Douglas's mental state wasn't fit for continuing in the setup, so he quietly helped him exit the study on his own, while the experiment kept rolling. Then, by day 3, the monitoring team noticed the guards' attitudes turning downright nasty. They ran strict roll calls 3 times a day on the prisoners, including one in the dead of night. That meant getting yanked out of sleep for a head count. Plus, no matter the hour, guards strictly forbade prisoners from chatting with each other. Truth be told, that wasn't even in the original rules. The guidelines only banned talk between prisoners and guards. But these guards went ahead and demanded no conversations among the prisoners, too. For those who didn't obey, guards would lock them in solitary confinement, deny bathroom breaks, or make them do push-ups. Heck, the guards even started tormenting the prisoners in other ways. Since outright violence was off-limits, their main tactic for harassment was banging on the cell doors with their batons to wreck the prisoners' rest time. None of these moves came from the experiment organizers. The guards cooked them up on their own. Starting on day 4, the prisoners' side shifted dramatically too. They turned incredibly compliant, with nobody daring to push back anymore. They followed even the most outrageous demands from the guards without question. For instance, if a guard ordered push-ups, they'd drop and do them. If told to scrub the toilet with their bare hands, they'd get right to it. No complaints at all. On top of that, some prisoners even started thanking the guards. This whole thing mirrored Stockholm Syndrome, where victims start identifying with their captors. As the prisoners showed signs of that syndrome, the guards ramped up their aggression even more. By day 5, the guards began dishing out some truly dehumanizing stuff, like forcing prisoners to lie on the floor and then stepping on them. The other prisoners just stood by watching, with no urge to fight back. At this point, the oversight team saw that a few prisoners were showing clear signs of mental distress, like uncontrollable shaking or even throwing up. So, they brought in a real Catholic priest for psychological counseling right there in the mock prison to check on the prisoners' conditions firsthand. After assessing them, the priest told the experiment crew that these fake prisoners were acting just like actual inmates in a real jail. He believed the whole setup was deeply unethical and needed to end right away. Still, Zimbardo figured the study couldn't wrap up just yet. Then, on day 6, all the other folks monitoring the experiment felt like things had gotten way too cruel. They started pushing hard to shut it down, and that even included Zimbardo's girlfriend at the time, Christina Masloch, who urged him to pull the plug. With no other choice, Zimbardo agreed to call it quits right there. The original plan had been for a full 2-week run, but it only lasted 6 days before halting. Yet at that moment, the guards seemed reluctant and claimed they didn't see anything wrong so far, that the study should keep going. Part of their mindset might have been worry about not getting paid. Of course, in the end, everyone still got their money despite the early stop. Even though the experiment got cut short, Zimbardo believed he'd proven what he set out to, that shifts in surroundings or social roles can trigger changes in people's mindset and even their core character. Those playing guards started off with some hesitation, but in just a dozen or so hours, that shyness vanished completely. And in the brief 1 or 2 days that followed, they came to view using certain inhumane or degrading methods on the prisoners as perfectly justifiable. That's exactly why Zimbardo believed this study proved that a person's character can get totally shaken up by authority, their role in a situation, and the surroundings they're in. He argued that folks aren't inherently divided into categories like skilled or unskilled, good or bad. We're all pretty much on the same level. The real differences come down to the environment, the power they hold, and the positions they're given. In other words, take someone who's a criminal and put them in a mayor's job, and they might handle it just fine. Flip it around, and a decent mayor stuck in a horrible setting could turn into a thief. Zimbardo pointed out that this is how things usually go. The surroundings shape who we become. Since the guards and prisoners were assigned randomly, swapping their roles would have likely led to the same outcome. Those prisoners would have ended up enforcing strict control over the former guards. So, what sets us apart as people boils down to our circumstances, status, and influence, not some deep-rooted essence. It's kind of like when a teacher picks a class monitor from the kids, and suddenly that student, once given a bit of control over classmates, turns into someone completely different. Zimbardo also figured that out of those 3 factors, environment, authority, and role, the biggest player is authority. People tend to have this built-in respect or fear toward power, so it has a massive impact on shaping personality. And speaking of that, we should touch on why Zimbardo even wanted to run this experiment to prove his point. Turns out, he grew up in poverty, and a bunch of his childhood buddies ended up as criminals later in life. Before he launched this study, both medical and social sciences mostly leaned toward the idea that personality is driven more by genetics. In other words, the main things influencing who we are come from what we're born with, and later life surroundings don't play as big a role. This was the old school thinking, like the saying, like father, like son, where people assumed kids from troubled families would turn out troubled, or offspring of criminals might follow the same path. But Zimbardo pushed back on that. He thought his old friends were good people at heart. It was just their tough, desperate living conditions that pushed them into crime. He set up this experiment to show that any of us could turn into monsters depending on our situation. It's all about the environment. If you're in hell, you act like a demon. If you're in heaven, you become an angel. Plus, he believed that handing someone special privileges makes them super aggressive. And yeah, the study backed that up. That's why Zimbardo named this whole phenomenon, where power turns ordinary folks into villains, the Lucifer Effect. Originally, it explained how Nazi soldiers could become so brutal they started as regular people but got twisted by authority into something monstrous. And honestly, during the experiment, it wasn't just the guards who morphed into demons. Even Zimbardo himself showed some changes. Everyone around him noticed his personality shifting. He was dead set on seeing the study through to the end. It took his then-girlfriend and colleagues stepping in to stop things from getting even worse. Zimbardo's findings sparked a huge buzz in the psychology world afterward, influencing the field for decades. That said, plenty of folks questioned the validity of his results. Later on, when people reached out to the original participants, some guards admitted that while Zimbardo didn't outright tell them to be harsh on the prisoners, He did emphasize making it as realistic as a real prison as possible. The more authentic, the better. So, those guards figured stricter meant more real, based on their take. Plus, one guard, Dave Eshelman, shared that while Zimbardo and the team were monitoring from the next room, the guards couldn't see them, but could overhear conversations. Once, Zimbardo was right behind a wall saying something like, "Look at that guard. Turn the camera over there. Focus on him." Eshelman heard it was about him, so he thought, "All right, time to put on a show." He stood up, started yelling nonsense, grabbed his baton, and banged on the doors. His mindset was, "This is a job, so I'll give it my all and perform to meet what feels like the director's unspoken expectations." Sure, not every participant claimed they were just acting, but you can imagine if even one or two kicked off the performance, it'd pull the whole group in. Before long, more folks might join the act, and if the whole thing was basically theater, then the experiment's conclusions lose all weight. After all, in a performance, you can script whatever outcome you want. That's why a ton of critics doubt the study had any real value. Then, something else came along that hit Zimbardo's work like a ton of bricks. In 2006, a super unusual bank heist went down in the US, playing out like a scene straight from a movie. On August 7, 2006, 4 masked robbers stormed into a Bank of America branch in Tacoma, Washington. 2 carried automatic rifles, while the other 2 had handguns equipped with red dot sights. The gear they brought was top-notch and modern. Once inside, the rifle guys stood watch at the door, and the handgun pair rushed the counter announcing, "This is a robbery." Right then, the door guards shouted, "2 minutes left." The counter guys vaulted over the bulletproof glass, ordering staff to hand over stacks of 20s, 50s, and 100s, while telling another employee to crack open the safe. They stuffed the cash into bags quick. Exactly 2 minutes later, a lookout yelled, "Go!" The 4 bolted with the money, heading to a nearby parking garage where they jumped into a prepped getaway car and sped off. When cops arrived, the bank's security footage showed the whole grab took just 2 minutes and 21 seconds. Their teamwork screamed military training, precision at a pro-army level. So, suspicion fell on soldiers being involved. At first, police had 0 leads, no fingerprints, nothing. But a witness later recalled the getaway car's license plate. 3 days on, that plate led them to arrest one robber, the driver, Alex Blum, a 19-year-old U.S. Army Ranger. Once caught, Blum spilled on his 3 accomplices, all still active in the military and fellow Rangers. The U.S. Army Rangers are the elite force of the ground troops. Even outfits like the Special Forces and Navy SEALs pull from their ranks. The brains behind the operation was Blum's superior, Sergeant Luke Elliott Summer, who was just 20, only a year older than Blum. The other 2 were 21 and 22. After a 2-year legal process, lead planner Summer got hit with 24 years in prison for orchestrating the armed bank robbery, plus illegal storage of firearms and grenades. His 2 main partners drew sentences of 11 and 12 years, respectively, with fixed terms. Here's where things get interesting with Blum, the first guy they nabbed. He only ended up serving 16 months behind bars. Why such a light sentence? For one, he ratted out his buddies. But the bigger reason? His defense team included none other than Dr. Zimbardo himself. So why did Zimbardo step in to defend him? Because this case fit his theory like a glove. In court, in front of the judge and jury, Zimbardo explained that Summer was Blum's commanding officer, so Blum saw the bank job as a military op. He went on to say that Blum's training environment was brutally tough and rigid. Living in that kind of military world for so long dulls your ability to think straight. You just learn to obey. So the robbery wasn't some personal choice or random impulse. It was forced by the situation and the chain of command. Backed by the Stanford Prison Experiment results, the court bought it and gave Blum just 16 months. But then, after getting out, Blum dropped a bombshell in interviews. He knew full well it was a robbery, knew it was illegal, and chose to do it anyway. That confession flipped the script. Suddenly, people worried Zimbardo's ideas could be a get-out-of-jail-free card. If this theory holds up, then pretty much every crime becomes, I had no choice. It was the environment. No one takes responsibility, and the whole justice system falls apart. Worse, criminals could game it. Hey, I didn't want to do it. You'd have done the same in my shoes. If personal accountability vanishes, what's the point of laws? That's why even today this experiment sparks endless debate. It's not totally wrong, but it's not totally right either. Circumstances absolutely mess with our judgment. But honestly, the scariest part of Zimbardo's study isn't how power makes people cruel. It's that any of us could turn into the monster. If you're just watching from the outside, it's easy to say, "Whoa, look how they changed. I'd never act like that." But drop any of us into that same setup, and our humanity could twist in ways we never imagined. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, hit subscribe for more, or check out the other videos on the channel while you've got time.